I'm Rebecca Lindquist with English by the Hour, and this is the second part of energy typing. You'll remember if you watched the first video, and I encourage you to watch the first one before you watch this one, that I discussed 4 energy types that were introduced by Carol Tuttle initially. And I also encourage you to Google Carol Tuttle, Dress Your Truth, and Know Your Type. She also works with other types of energy work. Now, you may have been asking why I'm so interested in energy typing when I teach accent reduction. And that's because I believe that knowing what your energy type is can dramatically help you simply by the knowledge of what your natural energy is and how it might be different. Now, my first question to you, if you watched my first video, is how am I speaking differently now? Because I'm speaking from a different primary type. I actually have 2 types, a primary and a secondary. And in my last video, I was speaking largely from my secondary. Today, and I want to call out to Ingrid Staub and thank her so much for doing an internet session with me. She is actually a published author in the personality profile world, and I met her from my last video. She responded. Thank you, Ingrid. She actually had a conversation with me, and we discussed style and how I might try using more of what is probably, and I'm still not sure, but probably my primary energy type, and that is stillness, or number 4. Now, I asked some of you, and there were 1,542 of you who commented on my last video, or who watched it. Thank you. Some of you commented. And many of you said that I appeared to be more of a 1 or a 2. Some of you said a 3 or a 4. Most of you figured out that I had some 4 and some 2 going on. And what I was coming from last time was that flowing energy, or 2. And I tend to like the softness of the 2, the comfort. 2s are all about comfort and all about a supportive, flowing nature. And I would argue that many people who speak American English have this type 2 sort of fluid movement in our speech. Now today, I'm not using as much of that fluid movement. You'll notice I'm not moving a lot in my body. Mostly, I'm still doing the eye-hand connection, but I'm not moving my hands nearly as much or as quickly. Maybe you've also noticed that my speech has slowed down. Now, my personal story, which I think is helpful in terms of thinking about type, my personal story that I would share with you is that I believe I started out life as a 4, this type that I'm exemplarizing, or that I'm showing you at this moment. And this particular type for me felt that I was too slow. I think there was a lot of judgment around it for me, that I wasn't keeping up, that I wasn't moving fast enough, I was not an athletic child. So I think I felt that the rest of the world was moving more than I was, and I didn't know anything about energy typing. But I feel now, speaking to you in this type, that I'm a little more solid, a little more grounded, and this style feels very, very comfortable to me. Now, the type 2 that I had last time is a little more pleasurable to me. So when I speak with this flowing energy, it feels very pleasurable. It also feels more intuitive. And I can tell you that in the last video, and hopefully this video as well, there will be less editing. So that's how I know that I was tapping into a better energy for me. Because when I do a lot of that upward, mobile, that high movement energy that is kind of fun and exciting and creative, I get exhausted. Now, I don't have any problem with creative people, and so I definitely want to make sure that you hear, as the audience, that I love creative people, and they motivate me, nurture me. I find them very fascinating. I find their energy to be restorative, in a sense, because I can be stiller and quiet, and they can have all the movement. So I enjoy type 1s. I feel highly motivated by them. They really make me feel great. However, if I integrate type 1 into my style, I feel an exhaustion, I feel a push, and number 1 is not a push energy, it's an upward, fun energy, but I feel exhausted when I use it. And that's what tells me it's not my native energy. The number 3 energy is the push and the shove kind of energy. It's a bit of movement, it's a get things done, reactive type of energy. There's nothing wrong with number 3. I find, however, when I do it, that I feel too much adrenaline rushing. I actually had an issue at one time where the whites of my eyes would show a lot, which is an indication that I'm overusing adrenaline, right? That I'm an adrenaline junkie, so to speak, a little bit too much stress. Whereas a true type 3 would actually feel great in, for example, an argument or being strong and forceful, whereas for me it's a bit debilitating. I can do it, but notice I'm speeding up as I do it. Now I share all of this with you because I think the journey of finding your correct type is important for everyone, but especially for those who want to improve their accent. Now I also want to call out to Igor by, let me see if I can pronounce the last name correctly, Boyarchenko, Igor Boyarchenko, and my apology for not saying it perfectly. Igor was one of the people who commented on my last video and mentioned that in teaching English in Russia, there is an issue of fear, and that sometimes people feel fearful when they speak English. And there can be a variety of reasons, but I can tell you that if you embrace the right energy style, the fear tends to go down. And the style, he also mentioned, in Russian might be slightly different than a preferred style in English. Because even though we have 4 energy types, and each person may be different, each culture, I believe, embraces or tends to magnify, maybe glorify, or prefer, right, move towards certain styles. So the type 1 style that's kind of vibrant and up, I think is accepted in the US. But I also find that a lot of my clients who have this sort of extra movement, and I want to make sure here, my intent is not to stereotype. Everyone is different. Everyone has a different preferred energy type. However, I find that people from India, and that is people who speak Indian first languages, whether it's Hindi, Gujarati, even Telugu or Tamil, Oriya, doesn't matter which Indian language. If you grew up speaking Indian languages, the tendency is to talk faster, and there's a bit more random movement. And let me show you what I mean by random movement. Not everybody moves the same way, and I'm not talking about traditional Indian movement, but there's a little bit of energy, and this to me is very type 1. Now, if that fits for you, and you're a type 1 person, I would encourage you to embrace some of that movement. But could you change that movement instead to this kind of movement? So see, I'm still going up, but I'm still kind of excited, and you can see a little bit of movement, but this is more American up movement, as opposed to this type of movement, which to me is more Indian number 1 movement. So the number 1 is simply upward, lots of movement. The dress that went with it was a little bit busier than what I'm wearing. So you'll notice I have a plain color on today and straight long hair. This fits my stillness. It doesn't mean I can't interject and use my hands, but notice how I'm not using nearly as much movement as I did in the last video. So we talked a bit about type 1. If you look at type 2, the fluid movement, if you feel that your movement is not fluid enough, so your language might chop like this. Some people speak English with a bit of an abruptness after each word. This to me is a carryover from other languages. Many tonal languages require so much control to get those tones correct that the sacrifice is made in fluidity. That's great if you're speaking Chinese. That might not be so great if you're speaking English and your first language is Chinese. Again, I am not trying to stereotype all Chinese people as speaking the same way. However, if my first language were Chinese, I would take a bit of a look at how my body language is associated with my speech. So if I gave a talk in my native tongue, let's say it were Chinese, what would my movement think like? You can go to YouTube and Google Chinese speeches. Even if you don't understand Chinese, you can see what the movement looks like. And I can tell you from my experience, and in the last few months I've been having my clients address their energy when they speak, even Chinese women tend to have a little bit more of this number 3 kind of energy, which is a little more of that push, energetic movement that's a bit geometrical. And by geometrical, I mean that it's shapes going in different directions. You see triangles, you see lines, you see a little bit more of a sharper movement and a push energy. You can think of nature and the roughness of nature. This is how Carol Tuttle describes it. But the idea is that even when the voice is getting more fluid, see my hands are moving in a fluid number 2 way, number 3 people, or people who tend to speak tonal languages, tend to keep the body language like this. Notice what it does to my voice when I do this. It doesn't serve me to create an American accent and then use body language that draws me out of that accent. or creates a disconnect. Now, can you have an American accent and be energy type 3? Yes, yes, yes. That was some number 1 for a brief moment. And my number 3 can come out when I call you to action. Here I'm being number 3. Here I'm being number 4, which is a much stiller energy. Now, don't confuse still energy with no energy. I can be very excited and still be still. Stillness is a more profound type of energy, in a sense, profound and deep. So I can communicate from authority as a 4, but I could also communicate from authority as a 3. I could communicate from authority as a 2 with a bit of softness, and I could communicate even with a little bit of excitement. I could still be an authority. Number 1 does tend to be more fun and a little bit more creative. I would encourage you, if you feel that movement of the 1, that you incorporate it, because I think many 1s hold themselves or stifle their energy because they want to be taken with credibility. They want people to see them seriously as an intelligent speaker. So I would encourage you, if you have a little bit of 1 in your makeup, to let it out. But let it out in this way, where the hands move and they connect to the eye and there's movement here, as opposed to this type of random energy. Is there a way to make that energy more deliberate? And you can still do the up, up, up and make it deliberate. And the eyes can go up and the energy can go up. I get very tired doing that. I'm definitely not a 1, definitely not a 3. The push exhausts me. The 2 makes me feel super comfortable and fluid, and the 4 really, really grounds me. So that's a personal discussion of my own energy type. I would encourage all of you to ask yourselves a couple of questions. Number 1, which energy type serves me best? And to find that out, try all 4 on. Now, this is easier than it sounds. Some people, if they're not a 1 and they try to be a 1, they feel crazy. And it's okay to feel crazy. Give yourself permission. Ask a friend to videotape you. And just see if you can get a little bit of upward movement into your speaking, and then see how you feel about it. Do you speak in a more comfortable way? Do you feel confident? Does it feel like a disconnect? How does it feel to you? Now add a little bit of smoothness. Add a little bit of movement. It's the downward flowing water movement. Add a bit of this to your speech, and then listen to yourself. If you sound like a zombie, you're not a number 2. You might be a 1 who's trying to quiet and smooth yourself. In that case, don't do it. There's no reason to be a 2 if you're not a 2. But try it out. You might say, wow, that looks good on me, right? And if it does, do more of it. Try being a number 3. Just see how it feels if you get a little bit of movement like this and a little bit of energy in it and a little bit of push. How does it feel? To me, I feel empowered but also exhausted. Woo! That's not good for my adrenals. Just not who I am. It might work for you. If your first language is tonal and you want a little bit more of authority, you can still do some of this, but see if you can do it in a more deliberate way. I find with Asian speakers that oftentimes the body remains still and just the arms move. And look how this looks. This is a true disconnection. So make sure you connect the body with the movement. Just like in dance, you could do a Zumba dance or you can do a hip-hop dance. It's not a right and a wrong, it's a style. And you, as the speaker, have your own and embrace it. If you're a still, and many Asian speakers are very still, and I find when I ask people, what do you think your energy style is? A lot of people say, I think I'm a 4, I'm still. This could be cultural. Some cultures encourage people not to speak up. I think in American culture, and I have not tested it out with data, but I would believe that if you ask Americans which energy type do you think is best or preferred for a speaker, you're going to get number 3 as an answer. People think that this kind of speaking is more emphatic, stronger, going to get you what you want. The challenge is there might be a way to keep a little bit of that energy in there once in a while, if it's not your primary type, and then still be true to your stillness. I can be still 90% of the time, and every once in a while I can do that, and it'll get your attention, because most of the time I'm not doing that. I'm being very, very consistent. So if I happen to be a number 1, and I had a lot of creative ideas, and I just really wanted to impart my true energy, but I wanted to be taken seriously, then I might mix it up with a little bit of stillness, or a little bit of 3, or a little bit of 2 for fluidity. Play with these energy types, Get feedback from others, enjoy it, and once again, I want to thank all of you for helping me to work on my energy type because it's made for a lot less editing.